Welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PI Collaborative Community aims to harmonise approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PI-CC is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law, because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of a discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
So, welcome everyone. It is the 12th and last PI-CC steering committee of this year. And as people are dropping in, let's unwrap this beautiful present of a pathology innovation collaborative community here. Let's get started. We left some ample time for discussion, and there's probably a few topics today that might be worth considering. So as always, let's start with the FDA updates. The first, and I believe Ulla is rocking it again by dropping a lot of the content that I'm about to go through in the chat. So there is a video series started, what type of research happens in the various centers, and one came from the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories, and the link and expertise will come soon. You see there's also other links. Some of these are available on YouTube. For example, the FDA Clinical Investigator Training course that happened just a few weeks ago. So if you like to take a closer look, I think that's a view behind the scenes of the engineering lab. Brandon, I don't know, are you presenting there as well? Or is your group reflected there? Or
I'm not exactly sure whether they're using some stuff that might have been created already or creating new. So I don't know.
Perfect. Well, I think everyone will be looking out for this, but I thought I just wanted to point to it. Thanks. The next element is, many new guidance documents. I think there was an end run to finish several. A few initiatives and programs, just as a quick pointer. So as many of you know, there are device software or software as a medical device, but there's also software that's used in medicine that is considered non-device, and a report on the risks and benefits of so-called non-device software and software function has been released. So that is highly applicable when it comes to, software that is near patient, but not really directly involved. So some of the things that come to mind is management software, not necessarily electronic medical record, but patient near software. The other part is a very interesting program about augmented and/or virtual reality, and there are a lot of devices in that space, especially when it comes to intervention, remote surgery, digitized virtual reality and/or headsets or remote controlled devices, etc. So that's covered in this document. Two other things that happen is one element is, of course, that the electronic health record vendors have a strong interest in identifying some of the technology complexities around that. Information blocking we tackled at some point, but there are some indications that certain transitions that the industry would like to make should be regulated. 21 CFR compliance is one, which is dual signature for certain elements. Now, this interfaces with many of the other programs we have presented previously, for example, real-world evidence, real-world data, and how to use EHR content, for example, for regulatory decision-making. So this is happening effectively in parallel to this prior report. So that's not directly in response to it, but definitely related. And then there's, of course, not only due to the public health emergency, but just in general, point of care drug manufacturing, which is, a, bedside or near patient drug manufacturing. The FDA looks for input. So there's a draft, a framework. So in case several people have asked about this, it gets to the point of device and drug interaction. Just wanted to point to it. One element is a FDA's Rare Disease Day. We have spoken about this before. February 27th, leap year would be even better because that's rare, but I think there's definitely some sort of relation to that. So February 27th, one full day, and it's about the intersections with rare diseases and a patient-focused event. I haven't seen the link. I believe Ulla has pasted it, so please take a look. Two important approvals that wanted to mention. Speaking of rare diseases, I don't know if everyone on the call has ever seen one, but an alveolar soft part sarcoma, or ASPS, is one of the rarest sarcomas in general, but atezolizumab has been approved. It's, I think, everyone with the tumor systemic disease over 2 years of age is part of the indication for use or indication of use part. The other part, which is accelerated approval for adagrasib for KRAS G12C mutated NSCLC. And these were two news that we put in the chat. So definitely relevant for a diagnosis triggering a treatment, and here a molecular genotype triggering a treatment or having an indication for a certain treatment. The other link that we wanted to briefly provide before moving on is that the Digital Health Policy Navigator, which is, a pooled tool and resource for many. This tool has been recently updated. And if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of products with software functions on there. So please take a look. And it's rather complicated. There's a lot of different documents interconnected, but definitely worth noting. Moving on, there's definitely some legislative updates. Up until yesterday, we had about 10 or so different links to various articles about the VALID Act, but it seems, at least by evidence in the news, that the VALID Act has been dropped from the end of year or end of the year omnibus bill. Some people will be happy, some will be sad. We're not commenting on that, but we are reporting this. And, some of the elements that are related to this are portrayed. So, of course, if it's removed from the major health policy deal, the question is what's next? And that might become a regulatory science question, which is, how to best regulate diagnostic tests. Now, some portray laboratory developed tests as loopholes, others as an absolute foundation for good care and good diagnosis in the US. And two resources related to this might be of interest to many of you. First, this is a paper published in the Duke Law Journal, specifically focusing on AI and the regulatory paradigm shift at the FDA, portraying in a very comprehensive fashion pretty much all related guidance documents, draft guidances, and controversies. And it's a very comprehensive paper. It's about 20 pages with probably on the order of 1,000 pages that they link out to. If you're interested in this, I'm sure the authors spent a lot of time doing this. It's a very, very good guidance document. The other document that has been circulating, which is, it looks like the date here is from a memorandum, but this is an actual assessment of LDTs. That's a document commissioned in between the HHS and several of the other agencies looking at laboratory developed tests. So while this is not current anymore, looking at that the valid is removed, it contains a lot of different perspectives from CMS, FDA, and HHS. So we shared the document just as a general information about, potential updates and hopefully improvements related to regulation of diagnostic tests. Next is Medical Device Innovation Consortium update. Just looking, Jitesh or Noor, are you on the call? I can't see everyone. If not, I can go over this real quick, or we can skip it. Did you hear anything, Ulla?
No, I haven't, and I don't see them.
Let's just go quickly over it, because then we have it. So there's a cybersecurity threat modeling virtual bootcamp. There have been several. This is coming up in March. So March 13th to 17th is these are the objectives. So definitely another course for folks who are interested in data privacy, data security. There's also a device cybersecurity maturity benchmarking webinar, which is coming up relatively soon in January, related, but this is more for open to the public, not necessarily an actual workshop, but definitely related to the benchmarking studies related to device security. There's also a white paper on patient preference related to payer coverage, especially related to health technology assessments. And MDIC is tackling this. And as part of that, they're trying to do also early feasibility studies and the best practices related to this. This is going to be in Boston, February 1st, and very likely of interest related to many of the aspects we discussed, potentially early endpoints, probably some of the feasibility studies for payers related to the payer operations team. I haven't heard the exact agenda, but it might be that digital pathology will also be included in this, but definitively no information yet. MDIC published a 5G in healthcare document. If you haven't seen it, you can go to their website and find it. And of course, if you have questions, I think Noor and Jitesh had some other obligations, so I don't know why they're not on the call, but definitely hear the emails in case you want to reach out. One element where I wanted to give a brief shout out to MDIC, which was I think Dr. Pucha from Freenome gave this seminar. He presented sort of an AI ML framework as an overview, and it's also open for public commenting. The framework itself is available as video. You see the screenshot here. The content is quite interesting. If you're working in this space, please take a look. There's some good comments on there, and it's still open. So if you haven't done that, please consider it. Quick jump over the Atlantic over to what's happening in Europe, because there's a lot of activity in the IVD, IVDR space, and also the health data space. One paper from an international group in Europe is outlining gaps between the new EU legislation on IVD or in vitro diagnostics and the on-the-ground reality. So effectively outlining why these two components, what is intended and how that's actually possible, why that is and why it's not possible. You see some of the names here that have contributed in many different ways. Of course, Roberto is known to this group. And so definitely a very interesting resource that I believe just showed up just before our last meeting. And I wanted to give a shout out. So great work. And if you're especially working in the global regulatory field, this is of great interest, because probably after the FDA, the EU legislation or EMDA is probably the biggest regulator. Related to these EU updates are two documents, both surfaced in early December. One is outlining the exact performance criteria to comply with the EU device regulation. It's a PDF that maps out to other PDFs that you have to then identify. So this is probably the closest to what this will likely look like in EU regulation. And simultaneously, from a different group, is a critical review as an informational publication for the European Commission and the Council of the EU for device regulation, outlining why it will likely be very, very difficult to realize this, because the so-called notified bodies are not sufficient to help with regulation and re-regulation of existing and novel devices. So two important documents. It will definitely stay interesting in the early phase of 23. Related to Europe and providing a clear vector is an executive order by the Biden administration. It appeared in October, but it's a gigantic push to help implement a European Union US data privacy framework. Data for regulatory purposes cannot be shared between the European Union and the US for various reasons, legal, national, and probably also from a technical perspective. So several meetings have been scheduled, and one big meeting is planned for Berlin. We will update in January when that will exactly happen, and there's a lot of people interested in this. The question is, of course, is the health data space fundamentally different than privacy data? And as you all know, the privacy data, the consumer data, and the health data in the US have diversified in different states. And how to bring this back together is problematic. But when you look at the EU-US data space here, there's definitely some fundamental interests on both sides. The professional societies have been pretty active. There's a lot of different links on the website. If you haven't seen that, I wanted to point out to one, which is from the friends at the CAP, which is a very interesting resource, patient-focused, patient advocacy related, which is how to read your pathology report, basically outlining how that can be done and how it should be done. And, definitely helpful. There's also several publications that reached us for circulating tumor DNA, but one element we wanted to point out is an interesting approval for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. We're waiting for the actual documentation, meaning the decision summary, but definitely look out for this. That will hopefully, we have already reached out to Agilent, whether they would be willing to do a similar decision summary session to review that, similar to what we've done a while ago with an AI tool. And we hope that that will be possible. Next topic is diversity and inclusion. Two interesting papers. One more on the educational side, which is a publication by Hamilton and al. About how and when to defend racial and ethnic diversity in undergraduate medical school admission policies and how to do this. A very interesting aspect on whether you want to create an incentive or not, and if so, how to do it. And at the same time, there was a publication in the Lancet about this question, why focus on one variable when there are many that should be taken into account? So, you know, the title, of course, implies why the preoccupation with sex. A lot of the topics discussed in this paper were relevant for regulatory submissions or regulatory science. For example, what is the optimal rate to represent from the different sex, biological, or gender in clinical trial design, and what is the evidence for biological differences between men and women, of course, and, you know, when it's not directly related to an anatomical difference, let's say like ovarian cancer, etc. Moving forward, the number of papers that received us exceeds our time today, and I definitely wanted, especially at the last meeting, leave some time, but I thought 3 stories definitely needed some brief pointing to. The first one is in the New England Journal of Medicine, appeared in early December by Rohan et al., and it is a biological-based therapy where tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes are cloned effectively to then be reinserted to fight the tumor. Of course, the interesting thing is not only that it's in the New England Journal and that the trial was successful, that this forms a new therapy, but I think it is interesting, number one, because it's tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte and many people in PICC care about it. But the similarly fascinating aspect on this is that all of this, which is an extremely effective therapy, is derived from a negative finding. And I, you know, at some point, I just figured that I wanted to trace this back a little bit, when and how that happened. And, you know, the actual first T-cell therapy was published in Clinical Cancer Research about a decade ago. And then, you know, another 10 or even more years earlier was the infusion of a first T-cell derived from a patient in a relapsed case of chronic myelogenous leukemia, which at the time was published in Blood. And all of that came from leukemia infusion. And those data came from a negative finding in 76, where Wyden et al. Reported that there was no graft versus host disease reported when infusing lymphocytes back into patients. So while you can't directly say that that's the only string here of evidence, it is definitely important that this negative finding was at some point reported and then followed up by many, many different groups. So this is, you know, arguably twisted, but definitely the result of a negative finding. To account for many other interesting articles, there is a summary, which the New England Journal, I think, started 2 years ago, which is called Notable Articles of 2022, which is a beautiful summary of, or I think they call it a collection of articles that's definitely helpful. And that's the second paper I want to, kind of like a Trojan horse. So it's not one paper, it's a paper of papers, but, you know, at least we get the best of the New England Journal. And then one other paper, which is coming from the FDA, is an opinion piece. Sorry for the highlights. You can erase those, I hope, in the PDF. But it is an insights from Dr. Pasteur and a few others about the difference between accelerated approval and that's not quite the same as conditional approval. The fact that, you know, various regulatory agencies require under conditional approval that certain endpoints will be verified after approval is important. So accelerated versus conditional approval and what those requirements are. So definitely helpful. So normally we jump directly to the events, and today I want to leave some time for discussion, but it's also the end of the year, and I wanted to review what 2022 looked like in PyCC. And since it's Christmas, this is kind of like a return of all the favors that many of you have granted us and helped in continuing to support this community. So Ulla, Julia, Brandon, several other people have helped contribute certain things, and I wanted to share a few so you know what this community is about. So our web traffic is up 58% on a year-to-year basis. At the peak time, this was in June, so perfectly symmetric. I mean, we're trying to strive for a Gaussian distribution here, it seems, but not quite. But we had about 1,300 web visits per month. The average, as you can see, drifts around 600-700 per month, which is quite substantial for us not selling anything or not forcing people to use it. So this is basically a complete voluntary part. Most of the people actually arrive directly to the website. They're not linked. We don't have advertisement, right? So many of the things that usually drive web traffic do not apply. So thank you. This is basically extremely impressive, I think, for a group like ours. The next is, how many of us are there? We discussed that this is basically a subscription to a mail service. We're going up above 500. You see that we're close to 700 by now. It's a cautionary ambition might be that we try to get over 1,000 next year, but that might be too ambitious. But just saying, the group continues to grow. The initial super impressive adoption is turning into a linear trend, and I hope that continues. We did a bit of an inventory of PyCC, and this is what it looks like. And we had many different updates, just like the one today. For example, 63 updates on guidance documents or initiatives from the FDA. That's on average, right? Roughly speaking, 5 to 6 per month. That's quite important. PyCC related points, anything digital pathology publications or so directly from PyCC is about 127. So that's, you can figure out 10 per month. MDIC provided 23 updates, and our friends from IARC or the WHO 14. We had 33 contributions from patient advocacy, 18 ethics or ethics in AI, diversity, inclusion, contributions in terms of resources, websites, or publications. I had to twist this over left side, so you have to twist your head a little, but there's 36 meetings and or projects or work group updates. That's actually quite impressive if you think about it. In terms of every month, there's one steering committee meeting, and that leaves exactly one meeting or one project per the remaining weeks per year. We have now featured on the website in the various committee meetings 270 papers, resources, or ebooks. And we had 5 full-hour sessions. You see down here, there were a couple, one related to evidence creation, one related to the Page AI decision summary. Brandon was kind enough to give a reader study design domain expert seminar. We had PathML present a platform. And if you recall, we had the AI Grand Challenges seminar. So that's 5 dedicated presentations. So as a half joke, I thought, how long would it take if you want to actually read this? Because a lot of people go onto the website and say, wow, this is so much. So please, of course, this is half a joke. Join my army of dinosaurs here to see how much we actually created. So when considering that each document or initiative that we link out to the FDA will take you 60 minutes, and every PyCC item 10 minutes, and every MDIC item 10 minutes, and you add all of this together, plus you watch all the videos, which is about 10 hours of content here, that's the 600 minutes in videos, you end up, if you spend in one stretch, if you want to do this, 243 hours. This, by the way, is only accounting for, roughly speaking, 30 minutes per scientific paper. Or if you spend 4 hours a day, you know, turning your job into half time, you would spend 60 days or 12.12 weeks, assuming a 5-day per week. So this is only the content from 2022. So if that means anything to you, it means a lot to me. So thank you very much for sending me all the interesting information, content, links. Not all can be mentioned, but the stuff that we incorporate, I think this is quite an impressive resource. And I'm not sure if anyone would want to spend 12 weeks looking at it, but it's good that we know that it's there. Moving towards 2023, we will continue our steering committee meetings. Jointly with Ulla, we decided that we try to send out the content a week before so people can look through the links and get prepared. That's probably more of a structural or organizational change, but we hope that will foster discussion and that we don't have to mention everything during the initial part. And we will hopefully be able to do this today as well. A few dates. In January, there's a CERSI meeting. Don't have to go through this. We're planning a in-person meeting in the DC area. Just as an outline, it hasn't been settled what the exact date is, but just to give you a few anchor points that I know a lot of you will go to. One is the USCAP meeting in New Orleans, which is in March. There's the API and Pathology Informatics meeting, Pathology Informatics Summit in May, Pittsburgh. And there's, of course, the Visions meeting more towards October. This is, of course, a small set of meetings. There are many, many others, but these are some that we had meetings in the past. So one idea was to have a meeting in the DC area either in February or in the summer. So definitely nothing final yet, but wanted to point out that look out for this announcement. We will have a meet and greet at the USCAP meeting. So the dates here for New Orleans again. We already made a little cover here because, you know, it's probably symbolizing that you can stop in and out. So we don't rent a meeting room. We probably meet at one of the hotel bars or gathering areas to just enable people to ask questions and interact. I believe the March 11th is the first day Saturday, so that's probably when we start, but hopefully we have some time there. A quick shout out in April, there's a Pathologist Leadership Summit, which will be hybrid, organized by CAP. And throughout the year, there's one in April, I think one in June in Italy, and one in September is the European conference on digital pathology, but also on pathology in general. And of course, I hope that I will see you all in 2023. And if I am not completely mistaken, this should have taken, roughly speaking, half an hour. So we have a lot of time to hopefully discuss other things and yeah, have a great time. With that, I open it up for questions, concerns, or other topics. Let me check the chat. Uh-oh. Keith, how are you?
I'm doing well, ready for vacation.
Nice.
Yeah, good to see everybody. That's a lot of time to dedicate to reviewing everything you've gone through in 2022. So hence my emoji string.
Got it. I couldn't construct when the emoji came, but yes.
I do have a question, I guess, related to the scope of activities that you reviewed. Do you find the updates from the societies that are dealing with some of these issues, CAP, API, are systematic, are ad hoc, or are they systematic? Do you try to connect with those people on a regular basis to see if they have something to share with this group?
It's a very good question. So with many, yes, but not with all. So it is all, I would call it people-based. So as an example with CAP, I know Kevin is on, Mary, Monica De Baca. There's a new council on pathology informatics and pathology information. So we connect quite a bit. DPA, MDIC, ASCP, ADASP, and the Association for Pathology Informatics as well. Not quite as frequent as CAP, I might add. And other societies, I'm not 100% sure, more sporadic. Friends of Cancer Research and the Association for a PIA, Pathology Interest Organization, Patient and Pathology Interest Organization, I would say every 2 months.
Oh, good.
It's a hit or miss, but it's not on a... We typically reach out, then we get feedback from the others, but some groups are more active than others. The work groups, we have to ding. And
yeah, right.
Most people are incredibly busy in this post-pandemic world, but we were given a chance to present sort of the scope and activities of PICC at several of the society's meetings. So the bidirectionality is probably key. So your question is, of course, hinting at, are they providing systematic feedback? But it's also on us to contact and reach out to them and provide what we're doing. But you know, this space is, while young, extremely active. It is, I mean, it's impossible. I think we had over 40 or so papers submitted on AI, diagnostic devices, regulation. So it is tricky. Also, it's very, very tricky for the various societies. Do you have a suggestion?
But no, just wondering how you, whether it's, I mean, there are occasional updates from subcommittees in CAP, but they're not systematic. And I know there's a lot of activity, particularly in the CAP subcommittees. I would just mention, I don't know if you saw the Ricciuti et al. Paper on the page approval was just published the last couple of days. I don't know if that was in your literature list, but it's always interesting to go from a presentation decision summary then to actually to see the final story. So, so just to let everybody know that's around.
I have not seen the paper, but I'm not sure if Ulla, if that's in our list. If not, if you could share it.
Let me. It's on a different computer, so but I could send it to you after. Yeah.
Joe, I'd say, assuming you can hear me, I think we should have at least once or twice a year asking DPA and CAP to kind of tally up some list of either initiatives that are ongoing or are being launched, because it would be nice to at least have some anchor points and deliberate sharing of what's going on like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm especially interested in knowing and having DPA put out what their regulatory and standards task force is doing. I know last month you told us that CAP won an award to fund some work, and I'd like to see how much overlap there is on issues in this group, and whether they'll be looking for partners and collaborators in that.
So are you asking if the CAP is looking for collaborators on the work they were just awarded?
Yes, or at least describing what the work is going to be a little bit more. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I could talk a little bit about that real quick, and then also I can point people to what's being called the All Shield Call, which the work is kind of a derivative of that group, which we'll do a longer presentation to. And Joe, I can forward you that once I have a little bit more information and link to the group. So right, this is all about enhancing interoperability for IVD test results, and the general idea from Shield right now is to build some sort of test coding repository being referred to as leader that every laboratory could refer to for how to properly encode their test result data with or anything to do with the right line code, the right SNOMED code, anything related to the specimen, things related to units and UDI. And the idea is that to make the data more interoperable by having all of the elements transferred at every step of the way, where you might send lab results to any external entity, and considering all the hops in between different locations. So from LIS to your internal EHR to for research or for external usage and things like that. So CAP's contract they won an award for is focused on, once you have this repository instantiated, where all this coding has been decided upon by either some sort of adjudication group or by the vendors themselves, how do you ensure that the laboratories implementing it have implemented it correctly, or have chosen the right code, so you're completely compliant with this agreed upon repository? And so that's what we're building towards.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
But I think that should be easily manageable to get updates from the societies. I think it's probably something we can put on, let's say, a quarterly ticker, and then just reach out for the, whatever, March, June, October, December meetings, and possibly reserve some time for the different societies. I think that's a great suggestion.
Maybe opposite when their conference is, because when their conference happens, that's when we hear the most, and kind of the in-between, that 6-month in-between time point would be kind of useful to see how those things played out and what's coming up next.
Absolutely. I see Alexander Sasha Sikular. Alex, are you still here? Or Sasha?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, thank you for joining. So there have been several meetings we mapped out on the website so the question was, any feedback on the CPT category 3 digital pathology codes? So I think the link to the corresponding CPT codes when you use this in clinical practice has been discussed in at least 2 meetings, one jointly by API and one done by CAP. So the API was with API, DPA, and CAP. The other one was CAP alone. The codes that should be linked to, we provide on the website on this month update. I think the 2 prior months have that as well. I think the current tricky part that a lot of people have to figure out yet is how to operationally integrate this. So if you use, let's say, a biopsy and you want to push out an 88305 code with the corresponding 0752 code, how to get this into the payer work queues and submit it. The idea is, of course, that you can track this at the national level for CMS and private payers, so that you get a rather true reflection of how many people are using how much digital at any given time. Now, it is legally mandatory to use this if you're using the procedure. While it doesn't lead to reimbursement, the idea is to track, of course, the utilization to eventually then help with price setting and demonstration that these procedures are used. There's a few important exceptions that have not been accounted for. I think one is prostate cancer biopsies. The other one is molecular testing, so circling of regions of interest. And then, of course, some of the digitization efforts that are existing. So if you actually use the currently existing code for quantification using computer-assisted technology, these new codes do not apply. So I believe that has been summarized by CAP. I see Kevin just pasted the link, so that's definitely a resource to look out for. Operationally, meaning how to logistically attach it in your LIMS system, and let's say go through your revenue cycle management to make sure that that's reported adequately, pushes the expertise of our IT staff collectively in the country quite a bit, because that is not a common pathway for integration of CPT codes in pathology. But I believe over the first couple of weeks in January, that might happen. Kevin, do you know, has someone tackled that at the college? Sort of the more logistics of how to do this with the LIMS system?
You know, I think the reimbursement link may have touched on that. Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to watch our own webinar on this and had a conflict actually with the project I was talking about that Brandon had mentioned. So I believe if we have, it's in there for the moment.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, Alex? Or?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. You know, it's just kind of an informal polling of the group of people here. I'm aware of, you know, the what's happening in the broader space, but I thought take advantage of the opportunity and see how people here on this call feel about it. You know, obviously we're watching very closely to see, as everybody else in the community is, to see how well these codes are adopted and what these utilization rates look over the coming year.
And the reimbursement itself comes, of course, from a different committee, but I think the idea is to have utilization codes on it. Some of the coding examples I know informally, I'm very interested in this just from a more logistic operation in my day job. And we went through several examples to just know, for example, simple things. If you have a gastric biopsies with 3 levels and you would scan 3 slides, but in another practice, you have a gastric biopsies where they take 1 slide, but they put a ribbon of sections on 1 slide. So the examined tissue is the same, but on the one hand, you have 3 files. On the other, you have 1 with 3 individual sections on it. The question is, utilization means at the 88305 level, staying with the gastric biopsy would be 1 unit. But the one practice may use 3 slides, 3 scans, triple the amount of storage, triple the amount of space of scanning it, while the encoded unit, which is 0753T, would be 1. Because the unit of utilization is at the same level as the 88305, meaning the main code. Which is, of course, that sounds at first glance counterintuitive, but that is currently the best measure to identify how many 88305s, meaning how many, let's call it biopsy codes, have been scanned at the national scale. I think that's the intent of this approach. So if then people start coding, you know, a 18305.
Incentives have a funny way of influencing behavior. So I'm sure these things will remedy themselves over time.
It is, I think it's, you know, a field or an emerging field that hits an unprepared delivery system. So I think after this iteration, pathologists will just learn how to use category 3 codes. That happens in other disciplines all the time, or in other subspecialties, I should say. But some of these are really funny coincidences, I guess. But you know, the 88361 code that's established, computer-assisted technology, that's already accounting for computer-assisted technology. But the slide scanning is just assumed to be in there. So there is no slide scanning code for the code that is used or should be used for the medical procedure morphometric analysis with computer-assisted technology, which is a bit counterintuitive. But I think CMS wanted to know, or you know, a lot of people want to know how these codes relate to one another. So definitely interesting. As one thing that I know several of the people on this call have been at the Association for Molecular Pathology conference. And I was extremely surprised how many digital pathology talks, data, vendors, and interest there was at this otherwise, next-gen sequencing dominated field. And I don't know, I just wanted to point that out, that the microdissection code or the circling code for molecular also doesn't have a corresponding digital path code. But I know a lot of molecular pathologists use this because it's easy to be adopted, right? We use one key slide or one key tumor block, etc. I don't know, those are just some of my thoughts.
I mean, could that be considered an encroachment, right? Because a lot of the AI studies are designed to basically eliminate the need for an actual NGS test by, seeing it in the pixels of the scanned H&E slide, right? So I'm wondering, I wasn't at this meeting. Were they welcomed with open arms, or are they viewed as a threat?
That's a very good question. I can't speak on on behalf of the various groups. I think I'm certainly interested in that topic, but that I can only speak on on my behalf. I think, to some pathologists, digital path is a threat, just in general, because they believe that AI may get rid of their jobs, while others embrace it and say, hey, this is the best thing ever because I can probably recover some micrometastasis that I would otherwise miss or potentially miss. That's always like the two sides of the coin. I went there for other reasons, and I was deeply impressed that people were really interested in it. I mean, there's tissue processing, fast, rapid testing is of course a key thing in molecular testing. So what you just outlined as the potential to derive a genotype from histologic slides is of course faster once you trained it and once you implement.
Right.
So I think that
could save money too. Yeah.
Correct. And plus then there's the whole thing about the trial settings in low to middle income countries, where it is effectively impossible to establish a, slide histology, next-gen sequencing, computational and bioinformatics pipeline, even like internet and upload, but you could totally generate AI-derived genotype predictions. So that entire field, I believe, is sort of the next emerging area that people will definitely be interested in. But yeah, but for example, rapid processing of tissues is still needed, right? That's like, even if you say we predict this from histologic slides, especially creating a slide, creating the block, getting the section and stain done, that still currently in most settings takes at least overnight. But I see Eriko is on the call. I know some of the people here have invested in a tremendous experience on rapid processing of tissue for exactly that use case. Other topics?
So I'll bring up a general one, and I want to restrict this to kind of the pre-competitive space, but I know the group in its early iterations, did a lot of thinking about how an AI would be approved and what that would look like and what the regulatory science around that is. So I guess, what are the next horizons that, that we see as the next big challenges? I mean, there'll be a few more AIs approved, the use cases will accumulate, we'll see what adoption is like, but yeah, we know there are other horizons that the group can think about, and these may already be covered in some of the working groups, but like, what are the next horizons to really, put our heads together and make some predictions or make the difference?
I think one aspect is definitely the regulatory language. Leaving valid and LDTs out to implement a test of a complexity like you outlined, AI will require domain expertise in a field that does not entail within their key training programs dedicated regulatory language, concepts, or insights. I'm trying to push, other training programs to incorporate firmly the idea that people will know what intended use, context of use, indication of use is. How to read a decision summary is a great example. A lot of people joined that webinar. We have quite a few hits.
Yeah, good.
People learn this typically when they start in industry. I don't know, I'm just talking from my experience. I don't know if that echoes with the group. But if you haven't been involved in an interaction with the FDA, you don't know all the value that they add in terms of documentation, documents, content, and what you can use and derive from that. The second part that, at least from my perspective, that's pending is, of course, how to regulate these high complexity tests. And while it's easy to say, valid isn't approved, or, we have to come up with a way, continuous performance monitoring is a huge challenge for any lab director. So those are sort of the two things that I like to throw out, but I don't know what others think.
Even one step before AI model development, I'm curious, and I apologize if this has been covered previously. It's my first time joining this group here. I'm curious if this group has a position on standardization through DICOM for digital pathology.
Yes.
I'm in favor of it.
Yeah.
I think that is going to unlock a lot of innovation and cross fertilization. Right now, I'm struggling with it myself in that it took me quite a while to find an FDA cleared scanner, and then it's all about what images formats are, so that the tools that I'm creating on the side are going to be applicable to not just the one images that I have, but then future scans from other systems, and anything I can do to try and move that needle forward. I've been trying to, whether it's talking to DPA, who I think is quite active in this effort. I do believe that standardization is once you have it, then life gets so much easier. And even the whole pixel pathway of digital images, it seems so achievable to demonstrate that this viewer shows the exact same RGB as another viewer, given the exact same image. But why we're not there yet, I think part of it is because we don't have the standard image format. That's one thing. And then the other is all the other image formats have a lot of recipe actions going on with how they decode or encode the image and the colors and everything in that area. And from a regulatory standpoint, it makes us have to regulate more strongly, because we can't just say it's giving the exact same answer, it's giving the exact same RGB in a viewer. And if to that point, viewers wouldn't hardly be a device anymore, because it would be a standard, and as long as you adhere to the standards, it would seem like we're ready to just check that box. But
so do you think there's a role for minimum standards in this domain of the monitor equivalence or adequacy?
I think the monitor review process is getting pretty easy. I thought I was more referring to the software, the viewing software, which is really tied to the imaging format. DICOM, whether could be DICOM, but right now it's all very vendor specific, and I think it gets really challenging when you are in the market to buy a scanner, and the one that they're currently selling isn't yet cleared, and then you buy it and then they clear it, but that clearance doesn't apply to what you just bought. I've heard that story like a dozen times. And it's really unfortunate to the group that buys it, because all the images that you collect with it are not worthy of a regulatory submission. You know, we don't clear algorithms, models, images from uncleared scanners, and yet the predominance of scanners out there, and you know, all the big hospitals that are scanning their inventory, past and current, are on devices that aren't cleared. So you might be able to do a lot of development. That data is not so relevant for regulatory submissions for the testing.
But if the technical specs of the RUO version and the IVD untested version are the same, I mean, would it be possible to put together a like a real world data package based on the RUO data set, assuming again the performance specs would be the same on the IVD device? I mean, that relates to, Joe, a larger question I would have maybe for the group to think about what would constitute you know, viable real world evidence packages in this space in the future, because I think some of the prospective type studies may never be done because they're either impossible or nobody's going to invest in them. So what does that look like as a you know, maybe that's too broad or controversial, but that's really of interest to me.
What you're outlining, the FDA would call tech cert, right? Where you demonstrate that you have the technical skills, knowledge, and proficiency to do something what you outlined, to use a certain combination of tools or toys or whatever you want to call it to provide real world evidence that you can do it. We could definitely explore that, you know, as a project, right? What would performance characteristics, numbers, etc. look like to demonstrate substantial equivalence? But you know, I think the FDA has clear rules on that. The question is, what if you would want to do this with something that has no in-market authorized or approved product? Because then that would be an LDT in our current thinking.
Yeah.
It's a very good question.
Yeah, I still sit on the DPA Foundation. They give a presentation for anybody who was at Path Visions this year. I mean, I would say our goal is, we haven't had meetings in a few months since Path Visions, but I mean, the broader goal is to generate evidence that would, in essence, de-risk investments in digital pathology systems to show the value. And so that, you know, the ability to do that in a way that would be directly applicable, as Brandon mentioned, to submission may not exist right now. We may have to wait until there's more cleared versions of these systems out there that could be you know, legitimately studied.
Yeah, if I throw out my 2 cents, is the solution's got to come from outside. We're too busy to figure out how to design that study that demonstrates that all these systems that have these characteristics would then lead to algorithms or models that perform equivalently or perform up to spec that they're labeled as or whatever. And you know, I think that's where the DPA has been the most engaged with the FDA by having created the opportunities to have those discussions and propose those things, but taking the real step of designing that study and is kind of where we are. I mean, someone's got to do that, but everyone's a little too busy or too afraid or looks at it as being too big. And as long as until that happens, you know, it's hard for us to green light anything.
Well, I mean, we've talked about, again, it's been a while, I don't know what the latest, but you know, we've talked about, you know, trying to get a base hit instead of trying to swing for the fences.
Sure.
Multi-million-dollar fences with the first thing. So, I mean, and you know, milestones are good for any tiered project like this. So you start small, you get confidence, and then you either repeat it or expand it or whatever. So it's going to be if it happens, it'll be a multi-tiered, multi-layered thing.
Right, and I'm not trying to talk down about it. I'm just trying to talk about practical challenges of it's not going to be the ideas and designs and research of the FDA
Right.
I mean, even on this call, there's about as many people on this call as who are dedicated to this entire field at the FDA, almost, when you think about visions. And when I think about going to Pathology Visions and I see all the people there and all the industry there, and there's a lot of people to draw from.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying
For
to
sure.
say that
I think
we are open to hear about it.
I think that is a perfect vector that collaborative communities should continue to exist and, you know, tackle problems like this size collaboratively. I want to be mindful of the time. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you all in 2023.
Happy holidays all.
holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.